This is Eugene V Dubs. In 1920, he ran for president and received nearly 1 million votes, all while serving time at the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary. His crime? Violating the Espionage Act. Sound familiar? Today we're going to talk about Eugene, the Espionage Act, and what the law says about running for president from prison. The Espionage Act of 1917 was enacted in June of that year, just 2 months after the United States entered World War I. The act was passed with the original intent of prohibiting the spreading and mishandling of information relating to the national defense, with intent to cause injury to the United States or aid a foreign nation during World War I. Before we get into what the Espionage Act actually says and how it ties Eugene V Dubs to Donald Trump, let me take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Factor. When I'm busy being obsessed with Donald Trump and delving into my research to bring you these high-quality videos, the last thing I want to do is cook. Factor makes meeting your nutrition goals easier than ever by delivering fresh, never frozen, dietitian-approved meals right to your doorstep. And my friends, this is not your grandma's TV dinner, all right? Factor's food is fresh and genuinely really tasty. Like the first time I took a bite of a Factor meal, I said, oh damn. I love that there's no prep and no mess to clean up with Factor meals, because y'all, I am busy and I'm not particularly passionate about cooking, but I'm also trying to be better about caring for my body, etc. And Factor helps me do that. Factor meals arrive pre-prepared and ready to eat in 2 minutes. So I get to eat food I know is fresh and healthy, but Factor also offers a really great variety with a rotating weekly menu of 25 plus meal options. I really loved this blackened salmon. I mean, look how delicious that looks. And the flavor is really good. Like, they don't skimp on the flavor. Factor's become my go-to lunch or dinner solution when I'm juggling a million things throughout my day and don't have time to cook. They also have these delicious protein-rich smoothies that are so handy when I need to head out the door, but I know I'll need to refuel before I get home. They have a variety of meal plans to choose from, but I personally appreciate that they don't skimp on the calories. Like, sorry honey, 250 calories does not a meal make. You know what I mean? I come from thick German farmers. I cannot survive on rabbit food. And Factor's meals are genuinely satisfying while also being tasty and convenient. Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, so with both brands, I really enjoy the flexibility of being able to cook conveniently with HelloFresh or grab and go with Factor. Love this for me. You can head to go.factor75.com/Leeja130 and use code Leeja130 to get $130 off across 6 boxes. Thanks, Factor. So the Espionage Act says, in relevant part, whoever being entrusted with or having lawful possession or control of any document or information relating to the national defense through gross negligence permits the same to be removed from its proper place of custody or delivered to anyone in violation of his trust, or to be lost, stolen, abstracted, or destroyed, or having knowledge that the same has been illegally removed from its proper place of custody or delivered to anyone in violation of its trust, or lost, or stolen, abstracted, or destroyed, and fails to make prompt report of such loss, theft, abstraction, or destruction to his superior officer, shall be fined under this title, or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. The Espionage Act was later amended by the Sedition Act of 1918 to criminally prosecute those who incited disloyalty within the military or to the government, resisted the draft, or incited insubordination within the United States Armed Forces. It made it a crime to, and I quote, willfully utter, print, write, or publish any disloyal, profane, scurrilous, or abusive language about the form of the government of the United States, or to willfully urge, incite, or advocate any curtailment of the production of the things necessary or essential to the prosecution of the war. When that act was passed, Eugene V Dubs was 63 and had a long history of union organizing. He had 20 years earlier been at the forefront of the Pullman strike of 1894, one of the single biggest labor actions in American history, as part of the American Railway Union, which was opposed to the harsh and deadly conditions imposed by the Pullman Company on its workers, who were required to pay their measly salaries back to Pullman for their room and board. The American Railway Union, helmed by Debs, organized a strike that stalled trains in 27 states, halting transportation west of the Mississippi for over a month, and resulting in Debs' first federal conviction, for which he served 6 months behind bars. I'll note that there have also been rumblings of strikes by train workers now, today. And it's interesting to note that 100 years later, we're still as dependent on our train system as ever, and apparently still putting our train workers in objectionable positions in their labor. Anyway, interestingly, through all of this, Debs remained a supporter of the two-party system in America. It wasn't until the election of 1896, when William McKinley won on a campaign funded by businessmen, that Debs officially became disillusioned with the two-party system and proclaimed himself a socialist, saying, "There is no hope of emancipation from the degrading curves of wage slavery. I am for socialism because I am for humanity. Money constitutes no proper basis of civilization." Debs would go on to found the Social Democratic Party of America and run for president of the United States on the socialist ticket a total of 5 times, winning as much as 6% of the vote in 1912, which remains the all-time highest percentage of the vote for a Socialist Party candidate in a U.S. presidential election in history. When World War I broke out, Eugene V. Dubs was a vocal opponent of then-President Woodrow Wilson and the war itself. On June 16, 1918, Debs made a speech in Canton, Ohio, urging listeners to resist the military draft. He was then arrested on June 30th and charged with 10 counts of sedition. At the time of his arrest, most of the nation's newspapers described Eugene V. Debs as a dictator or a traitor, and newspapers could not publish his speech because it was considered seditious. His speech condemned the draft and the war, and he said that the working class who fight the battles, the working class who make the sacrifices, the working class who shed the blood, the working class who furnish the corpses, that working class have never yet had a voice in declaring war. During his defense in court, Debs took the stand and was allowed to speak for hours. In that speech, he focused less on socialism and more on the First Amendment, saying, "I believe in free speech in war as well as in peace. If the espionage law stands, then the Constitution of the United States is dead." During his sentencing, after he was found guilty, he once again was given the opportunity to speak, and he said, "While there is a lower class, I am in it. While there is a criminal element, I am of it. While there is a soul in prison, I am not free." He was sentenced to 10 years in prison for his speech in Ohio. Debs was later pardoned by Warren G. Harding, the man who beat him for president in 1920. He was pardoned and released on Christmas Day 1921. The conditions in prison had caused his health to deteriorate so much that he spent the majority of the rest of his days in a sanatorium, eventually dying in 1926 at the age of 70. Now, this is just a small piece of Eugene V. Debs' story, but I wanted to tell it because I think it's interesting that the legacy of this man who has inspired figures after him like Bernie Sanders has now become linked with the potential criminal indictment of Donald J. Trump, a man who truly could not be further on the opposite end of the spectrum from Eugene V. Debs. And this connection is through none other than the 1917 Espionage Act, for which Eugene V. Debs was convicted and for which Donald Trump is currently being investigated. For background, in case you've been living under a rock recently, the FBI searched Trump's Mar-a-Lago home in Florida at the beginning of August after receiving intelligence that the former president had been storing numerous boxes of government records, including potentially over 100 classified and highly classified documents that he refused to turn over to the National Archives. During the course of their investigation, the government alleges that they have reason to believe that Donald Trump hid these confidential documents from them, destroyed some of these confidential documents, mishandled these documents, and even misplaced them. Of course, the portion of the Espionage Act under which Donald Trump is being investigated has to do with the negligent mishandling of national security documents and the illegal removal or the destruction of government documents. And the portion under which Eugene V. Debs was prosecuted, the Sedition Act of 1918, which you'll remember was an amendment to the Espionage Act, was repealed rather quickly in 1921, when it became clear that the law was a blatant curb on free speech rights. However, this part of the United States Code and its history still connects these two exceptionally disparate men, and it remains to be seen whether their fates will be similar. The investigation into Donald Trump is ongoing, and we don't know what the outcome will be. But given the aggressive stance that the government is taking in prosecuting this case, and when I say aggressive, I don't mean prosecutors are being overtly aggressive. I mean they are moving forward in an obvious and public manner with the investigation in a way that the feds would really only do against a former president if they had enough reason to think that securing a conviction could be likely. If that were to happen, it's possible that Donald Trump would be tried, convicted, and sentenced to prison for his alleged activities. However, as we all know, the law moves at a glacial pace, and the presidential campaign of 2024 will begin soon. So he may not even be convicted by the time the 2024 election rolls around, for which everyone says he's probably planning on running. But he could still be in the process of being prosecuted by the very government against which he is running for president, which is a political quagmire even if you don't support the belief that this investigation is politically motivated. But nothing in the Constitution bars a person from from running for president from prison. Article 2 of the Constitution governs the election of presidents, and it requires only that the presidential candidate be a natural-born U.S. citizen who is at least 35 years old and has been a U.S. resident for at least 14 years. And so, the fact of someone being imprisoned does not bar them, technically, from running for president. And in fact, Eugene V Dubs is not the only person to have ever run for president from prison. In 1992, a man named Lyndon LaRouche ran for president from prison after being convicted of mail fraud in 1988. He defaulted on more than $30 million in loans from campaign supporters and was also charged with conspiracy to defraud the IRS. So if these guys could run for president, so could Donald Trump. The difference, though, is that Donald Trump actually stands a chance to win. Then what? Will he give his first presidential address from inside a prison cell? What does that look like? That's never been done. And that's a whole separate can of worms. But on a theoretical legal level, it can be done. However, I'm skeptical about what would happen if a criminal conviction or even a criminal trial were to be initiated against Donald Trump. What are his followers capable of doing, given that the mere searching of his residence via a legally obtained search warrant by the FBI led to threats and attacks against FBI agents? And any conviction of Donald Trump would further bolster his supporters into thinking that he, Donald Trump, is the ultimate victim of the corrupt politicians in Washington. And their support for him would grow stronger than ever, despite the fact that I can't think of a person more entrenched in the elite sector of this country than Donald J. Trump. As for the Espionage Act, as I said, the Sedition Act of 1918 was an amendment to the Espionage Act that was repealed in 1921. But many portions of the original Espionage Act of 1917 are still law. Daniel Ellsberg, the former defense analyst who leaked the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times, was charged under the Espionage Act in 1973, though the charges were eventually dismissed. Edward Snowden was charged with violating the Espionage Act after leaking classified documents related to the National Security Agency's widespread surveillance programs in 2013. And while he's since fled the country, he could be prosecuted under the Espionage Act if he ever returned to the United States. Julian Assange was indicted for 17 counts of violating the Espionage Act after receiving and publishing classified documents, which is of course interesting because there are many people critical of the United States government who see prosecuting Edward Snowden and Julian Assange under this act to be problematic and a method by which the United States government can silence dissent and whistleblowers. But now, because it's being directed at Donald Trump, there's a new wave of Republican criticism against the Espionage Act. Another one of the many fun instances where the right goes so far right that they become a little bit left. Very interesting. Maybe we should revisit how we prosecute whistleblowers. Interesting. I don't think it should apply to Donald Trump, who was doing zero whistleblowing, but it's an interesting idea nonetheless. So that's the long answer to your very simple question of, can a person run for president from prison? The answer is yes. What happens afterwards if he were to win? That's a whole other story. Thank you once again to my partner on today's video, Factor.
Reminder to head to go.factor75.com/Leeja130 and use my code Leeja130 to get $130 off across 6 boxes. Thanks, Factor.
If you enjoyed this and want to support my work bringing you videos like this, please consider becoming a member of this channel or joining me over on Patreon, where we have a lively Discord chat, Leeja's book club, behind the scenes stuff, and so much more. Thank you especially to newest Patreon supporters Lisa and Molly Gore, and as always, thank you to my royal patrons Old Man Pence, Fork McSpoon, Ellen L, and Daniel Taylor, and a very special thank you to my multi-platinum patrons Brett Piontek and Cyrus Solka. Your generosity is greatly appreciated, and it makes this channel what it is, so thank you. If you liked this video, you'll probably also like my last video, where I talk about why Republicans are so obsessed with Hunter Biden's laptop. Thanks so much for watching, have a good day, bye-bye!